In the previous segment, I talked about the importance of impact preaching and recommended a book to you by Martin Lloyd-Jones. In this segment, I want to give you some ideas on how to be an impact preacher. There are various ways to do this. The primary way to be an impact preacher is to have really good content. And throughout this online course, we're going to give you a variety of tools on how to be an effective expository preacher to ensure that your content is impactful. In this segment, I want to give you some specifics, some very practical things that you ought to do that can grab people's attention. One of the ways you can do this is through humor. Now, if you're not naturally a funny person, don't try to fake it. That's okay. Some people are naturally really funny and really witty. If that's you, go ahead and use it. But if it's not you, then don't do that. Try to be you. If you're a great storyteller, then go ahead and tell a lot of stories. Open your sermons with great stories. Two contemporary preachers that I think are phenomenal storytellers are Matt Chandler and Andy Stanley. Both are megachurch pastors here in the United States. Both have this remarkable ability to tell stories and kind of draw people in. If you're not great at telling stories, that's okay. You should limit the number of stories that you tell. Of course, you should also seek to become a better storyteller, practice telling stories, and maybe get better at doing it. But if you're not great at it, don't feel the pressure to tell a bunch of stories. Every great sermon should include some stories, but depending on your skill and talent in storytelling will determine whether or not you use lots of stories or a minimal amount of stories. A few other things you want to consider whenever you are seeking to be an impact preacher are the speed and intensity of your voice. In essence, the inflection of your voice ought to change. It ought to go up and down based on the moment. So many young preachers, people who are first starting out, will frequently keep the same rate of speed, the same intensity. When I was a new preacher, I was really intense. People who know me well know me to be a relatively louder, more intense personality. If I'm honest, I have the tendency sometimes to be a tad bit obnoxious. And because of that, I had to really learn to shift. When I first started preaching, I would be at the 9, just constant, be really high, talking fast, and really, really intense. I was just going all the time. It was like a fire hose. I remember someone telling me, Kenny, listening to you preach is like an emotional workout. I'm exhausted. My muscles hurt. I'm sore because you just gave me too much intensity. And on the flip side, there are some people who are just simply very calm and quiet and maybe even monotone. And the reality is, if you're going to be a great impact preacher, you have to really have a variance in your speed, your intensity, your inflection, your voice tone, your volume. So when you're really excited and you want to drive a point home, you can bring your voice up, you can talk really fast, use your volume and then pause. And then bring your voice tone down, bring the intensity down, and use your inflection, use your volume to drive home points. This is really, really effective. If you're someone that naturally sort of stays at a lower level of intensity, that's fine for most of your sermon, but there are moments where you're going to have to bring it up a notch. And if you're someone like me, that maybe you're on the high end, you're really intense, you're always really excited about everything, you're going to have to purposely bring it down sometimes. The variance is going to be a very, very effective tool for you when you are seeking to be an impact preacher. If you don't do this well, you're not going to be impactful, plain and simple. Another thing that's really, really helpful when you are seeking to be an impact preacher is the power of the pause. Frequently what I do when I've got my sermon notes, I'll write out moments or I'll type out a moment exactly where I want to pause. I'll make a statement or I'll write out the statement that I'm going to make, and then I'll put a little note, pause, in all capitals in bold. That's a reminder to Kenny to pause. Give the person an opportunity to digest. Pausing can also be really, really helpful because frequently if someone zones out and you pause, it draws them back in. When people are used to hearing a sermon or speaking or teaching, they'll be sitting in the audience and they'll be listening, and then they'll tune out. And all of a sudden they won't be listening anymore and they'll just be sitting there kind of zoned out. And then when you pause, it'll wake them up and they'll think to themselves, what's going on? Why did he stop? Something wrong? It'll grab their attention. So as you're teaching and speaking and preaching, you want to be giving lots of information and use your voice tones to go up and come down and give a great statement and wait. Pause and allow them to be drawn back in. It's a really, really effective manner to be an impact preacher. The final practical bit of advice I want to give you that I think will really help you to be an impact preacher is eye contact. This is really, really important. Now, I know some people out there say that you should not preach with notes. In fact, my seminary professor in my first preaching class told me that we should never preach with notes. We should memorize all of our notes so that we can be fully engaged with the audience. Now, with all respect to Dr. Matz, whom I love dearly in seminary, I'm not sure that I fully agree. I think it's okay to use notes. Quite frequently, I will have notes. But I understand the sentiment that Dr. Matz was trying to get me to embrace. I understand what he was trying to say. Dr. Matz was just trying to make the point that so many different preachers get glued to their notes. They get focused on their notes, and they're standing behind a pulpit or a stand or a high top table if you're at a really cool church. And they're simply staring at their notes their entire time, or their iPad if you're a millennial pastor. And they're looking at their notes, and they just never engage with the audience. And this could be a significant problem. There are two ways to make eye contact. I want to make sure that you understand both of them. Some people typically go to the individual eye contact. They're just looking at individual people. Some people just do the gaze. Both are really important. And typically when I'm giving sort of generic information, I do the gaze. I'm just kind of going left to right, just going all the way left, all the way to my right. Just kind of do it slowly. And I'm talking and I'm preaching and I'm giving some content, giving some ideas. And then when I get really excited and I want to bring home a point, then I want to stop and pause, make eye contact with one person, then another person, and another person, and another person, and another person. If you really master eye contact, you will find people listening to you more and being more impacted by the words that you say. These are just some of the practical tools and tips that you can utilize in your impact preaching, or your desire to be the most effective impact preacher that you can be. Certainly there are other things you can do, other tips and tricks along the way. These are just a few of the ones that I would encourage you to utilize and consider as you seek to develop your impact preaching. In the next segment, we're going to talk about the heart that we must have for the people that we are preaching to.